maybe I don't have it as all figured out. There's what's said, what's heard, and what was meant.
You can't go into the conversation with any assumptions.
Welcome to the Manhood Understood podcast.
What's going on, son?
Nothing much. I think we got another good topic to hit on, so excited to get into it.
Yeah, we're going to talk about communication today and the power of communication, and I'll just start us off by saying that I am certainly not an expert in good communication. It's something that I've been working on for years, and something that I certainly didn't do great in my personal relationships early on in my adulthood. It's kind of funny. I think I was a pretty good communicator when it came to work, and maybe we'll hit on why that is. As a police officer, work as a police officer, better than I was in my personal life. So, I think good communication skills are essential for building strong relationships, succeeding in the workplace, and navigating your everyday interactions, right? So, defining effective communication is probably the first step, right? Do you have a definition of effective communication?
Yeah, I couldn't give you a solid definition, but to add on to your point, I think like a lot of other things, communication is something that's constantly worked on, right? Like riding a bike, once you learn how to ride a bike, you never lose it. But it's not necessarily the truth when it comes to communication, it's something that you always have to constantly work on.
Yeah, reps, right? Reps in anything. And I think even as we think we have it right, sometimes it's one of those things where you'll think you have it right, and then something will happen and you'll realize, well, maybe I don't have it as all figured out as I thought I did. Because here's the thing, right? I believe there's three parts of good communication. There's what's said, what's heard, and what was meant. If you can get all those three in line, then that's good, effective communication. But I think all too often, what is said is different than what is meant, and what is heard is certainly different than what is meant. So I think one of the things, a good characteristic of good communication is clarity and being concise. I think all too often we try to express our ideas with like a lot of unnecessary talking and jargon, and sometimes we try and sound smarter than we are. But when we can just be very succinct and clear in what our message is, and I think when it comes to, like, listen, some communication is on the spot, right? And you say things without thinking. But if you're going to have an important conversation or, a critical conversation, or just a conversation, right? A difficult conversation. I have a buddy, I know I talk about the Iron Council all the time, but I have a friend in the Iron Council who hates that difficult conversation or critical conversation. He's like, no, it's just a conversation. So that's a reframing, right? I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves when we have to have a conversation. So I think, and I don't want to speak for Frank, but I think Frank's point is reframe it into it's just a conversation. But I think when you're intentional and you think about what you want to say, like if you're going into a meeting with your boss, or you have to address something with your significant other, it's always good to do it with some forethought on what you're trying to accomplish and what you would like to see the end result of. And one of the results of that will be that clarity and conciseness, and not kind of rambling, which I do have a tendency to ramble.
I think the clarity and being concise is not having or not making any assumptions, right? We lose the lack of communication because we're assuming that the other person is going to perceive this in the way we're trying to put it out. So we don't go into great detail on what we're talking about because we're making a lot of these assumptions. And I also think there's two parts to it, because you can't go, if you're trying to have a conversation, you can't go into the conversation with any assumptions with how the other person is going to perceive it, or how the other person is going to take it or react to it, because then you go into the conversation already having this understanding in your mind of how you assume it's going to go.
Yeah, I think when you talk about assumptions, I think of the book, The Four Agreements, right? And I think at least three of the four agreements apply here. And the book is literally called The Four Agreements. It's by, I believe the author is Don Miguel. I'm drawing a blank now. It's Don Miguel something. But the book is called The Four Agreements. It's a short book. I think everybody should read it. Vince, if you haven't read it yet, I don't know if I've ever shared it with you. You should certainly pick up a copy and read it. You could read it in almost one sitting. But the four agreements are, one of them is don't make any assumptions, don't take anything personal, and be meticulous with your word. And then the fourth one is always do your best, right? So they always do your best. I mean, it applies to communication, right? Always do your best for good communication. But the other three, and I might have said them in the wrong order, but the other three, you hit on it. Don't make assumptions, right? If somebody says something and you're not clear on what it is they mean, don't make assumptions. Ask, right? Ask for clarification. Ask questions. Hey, you said this. When you said that, I felt this way. Is that what you meant? So don't make assumptions. Don't take things personal. I mean, that's a great one, right? It's, all too often we take what people are saying as an attack on us, and more often than not, it's not necessarily an attack on us. And then be meticulous with your word. I mean, that is communication, right? And that's what we're talking about, being clear and concise. So great book and applies to what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I think when we go into a conversation, we tend to get defensive from the jump. Like, that's our natural reaction, is to be defensive. And I think it's okay to have those feelings of wanting to be defensive, but what's important is how we manage those feelings, because I think it would be unrealistic to say that we're not going to naturally want to get defensive. But it's about like seeing past those initial natural reactions.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about, kind of what you're talking about anyway, is active listening, right? If we're not actively listening and we're preparing our defense of what we're going to say, and that's like, kind of what you're saying is as somebody's speaking, instead of truly listening and paying full attention and responding thoughtfully as they're talking to us, we're making these kind of assumptions, or we're getting defensive because we think we have to defend ourselves. So I don't think you're wrong that there's a natural tendency to get defensive sometimes. And I think you're right. If you do get defensive, what you control in that, right? So here's the thing. We don't necessarily control that feeling, right? Feelings just come. But we control how we respond to that feeling. So I think you're right there, but I think if we practice active listening and you're fully paying attention, showing interest, and being thoughtful about your response, so like kind of waiting until the person's done talking to respond, and even taking a pause to respond before you respond, or really process what they said, I think we can overcome some of those some of that defensive feeling when we're having a conversation.
Yeah, I think you hit on something really important. Like, you don't have to just jump back with a response right away. You kind of take a second, take a pause, collect your thoughts, and come up with an answer. And actually think about what you're about to say.
Yeah, the power of the pause, right? And I think it truly is powerful, because if you just kind of react versus respond, you might say something that you don't mean. You might say something that you're going to regret. And I think part of that power of that pause is kind of having some empathy, right? And maybe taking a second to understand and respect where the other person is coming from and how they feel. I think when we do that, we become better communicators and more understanding of the other person's position, right? Because I think in almost all situations, we can put ourselves in the other person's shoes. We've probably, if it's somebody's coming to us to tell us like, hey, maybe you're not quite getting, your boss comes in and tells you, hey, you're not quite getting the job done, right? Like we can put that ourselves in other people's shoes and understand. Maybe that's not a great example. Your boss, like maybe you did something to upset your girlfriend or your significant other, and you can kind of put yourselves in their shoes and see, like, take that power of the pause and put yourselves in their shoes and say, you know what, I can see where they're coming from. And if somebody did that to me, or if somebody said that to me, I would feel the same way. And I think you're going to respond differently than if you don't take that time to be a little empathetic.
I think you got to go into the conversation with a little bit of humility, because if you go into the conversation, thinking, I'm going to show this person, then you're not doing what you're talking about with being an active listener. And you go into the conversation with a little humility. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe this person's perspective or thoughts can provide a better perspective for myself.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about being open-minded, right? And I think I first heard it. Joe Rogan said it. I'm not married to my opinions, and I stole that from him and use it all the time because it's truly how I feel. The wording, "I'm not married to my opinion," is what I stole, but it is how I feel. It's here's the thing: I have my opinions, I have my thoughts, but if you can convince me otherwise, then I'll change. Or if listening to you and being open-minded to what you have to say and some being empathetic and active listening, these other things we're talking about, it might just reinforce my opinion. But regardless, if I'm open-minded to listening and considering your viewpoint and engaging in the dialogue, I'm either going to come back out with a changed opinion or a stronger, my previously held opinion will be stronger. And I think, the bottom line is part of good communication is that open dialogue. Doesn't mean that you're going to have, at the end, you're going to come to some, shared conclusion, right? Sometimes it's, hey, we'll just have to agree to disagree, but there's a proper way to do that. And good communication is the way to do that.
Yeah. I also think it doesn't just take one conversation. If all you're having is one conversation, right? It's not really, you should be having multiple conversations. It may take multiple conversations for both sides to come around to each other.
Yeah. I mean, listen, if it's necessary, right? I do think sometimes you can solve a problem in one good communication, but sometimes you can't. And sometimes when you're getting, emotional, again, I think usually a lot of what we're talking about here is conversation during some kind of conflict, right? Whether it's with your significant other or boss, whatever the case may be. At least right now, that's what we're talking about when it comes to good communication, or what I think of. And sometimes when your things are becoming emotional or heated, it behooves both parties to say, hey, let's take a break. Let's, we're both getting emotional here. We're both getting upset. Or I can tell you're getting angry. I'm getting a little angry too. Let's take a break and come back and revisit this after we've calmed down a little bit. So I think in that sense, multiple conversations could certainly be appropriate.
I think what you just hit on is really important. When something arises, you get emotional or you get passionate about it and you want to talk about it right then and there, but sometimes the best thing to do is put it on pause so that cooler heads can prevail.
Yeah. I think we got a good kind of agreement on what good communication looks like, right? What do you think some common misconceptions in communication are?
I think some common misconceptions could be that there has to be some type of winner coming out of the conversation. Like, oh, I won that conversation.
Yeah, I think that's a huge misconception, that you have to win, right? If you go into a conversation thinking you have to win, then nothing's going to be resolved. That goes back to that open mindedness, right? One misconception I think of, and I think a lot of people make this mistake, is that talking more equals better communication, right? We talked about being concise and succinct, but I also think sometimes listening is good communication. Sometimes I think asking good questions and then just remaining silent, right? Like there's power in that silence. And, if you're really trying to get somebody to open up, ask a good question and then just be quiet. Right. Cause it's a little awkward, right? If we're both sitting here in silence, it's a little awkward, and eventually somebody will break that awkwardness and start talking. Right. So if you're having a hard time getting somebody to open up or really talk, ask good questions and then just remain quiet.
I think you could probably hit this a little better than I can, but from what I've seen through videos online and everything, when the police are interrogating somebody, they don't say very much. They just kind of let the person talk because when there's
Yeah. Yeah,
awkward silence, it's
there we're trying to trap them, right? Or not trap them. We're trying to get them to confess. So, I don't know if that's a great example. You're not wrong. And it is a good example of what I'm talking about, right? Like, but it's not, I'm not sure we should use that as the example for good communication, but it's certainly an effective interrogation skill, which being a good communicator is part of that. But it's the same idea, right? You're not wrong. And it's the same idea. And it's not two different intentions, maybe. Like, we're not going to, if you're having a conversation with your wife or your boss or somebody that you supervise, you're not using that awkward silence to trap them into something. You're just maybe trying to get them to open up a little bit and share some of their feelings when they otherwise wouldn't, especially if all you're doing is talking, right? If all you're doing is talking at them, that's not good communication.
yeah, little good example right there of bad communication.
Yeah.
Of trying to, I wasn't trying to say we should trap anybody here, but
Yeah, I gotcha. Um, one thing that good. You had a thought?
I was just gonna say, um, to add on to a little bit of what you're saying is that like these conversations, oftentimes are gonna be tough conversations that need to be had, but they are gonna be tough. They're gonna be awkward, but we can't beat around the bush. Like you're saying, we have to be clear and concise. And just if you have something to say, you just got to come out and say it instead of trying to beat around the bush a little.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think anytime you have a problem, communication will almost always solve it. I always say good communication and relationship building solves most of our, at least interpersonal problems. Um, so if you're not getting along with somebody or you're trying to, you're starting a new job and you're trying to, for lack of a better term, fit in. Fit in's not the right word, but that I want to use, but for lack of a better word, that's what I'll say. Fit in, good communication and relationship building. And how do you build relationships? With good communication? They go hand in hand. One thing that we haven't really touched on too much is verbal communication versus non-verbal communication. How do you think that plays into good communication?
I think it plays a lot of roles. We could think about a few examples of, if somebody's trying to have an active conversation with me and I'm showing disinterest through my body language, right? They're going to perceive that as me not wanting to have that conversation or not caring enough to have the conversation or to hear them out, or they may be thinking that I'm not even listening to them at all.
Yeah. And spot on. And I also think along the lines of what you're saying is sometimes, you're I can't hear what you're saying because your actions speak so much louder than your words, right? And if you have this like body language or facial expressions or tone that doesn't match what you're saying, so maybe you're saying you're saying something kind or you're trying to say something positive, but your tone or your seems sarcastic or your facial expression says that you don't truly believe what you're saying, it's going to totally contradict your spoken words. So I think it can either contradict or reinforce, right? So I think regardless, we need to be conscious of the nonverbal cues we're sending when we're trying to communicate. And the tone is part of that, right? Like your mother and I, always kind of have this conversation because in her mind, and I think I thought this for a while too, that we would say sure, and sure would be like, well, that's yes, but is that, like, in our minds it was yes, but I don't really want to do it, right? And then finally, not that long ago, we talked about how, like, no, when I say sure, I mean sure, like, but for a long time, for a lot of years, the word sure means yes, right? More or less, you're agreeing to it. But maybe the tone or the the body language or the facial expressions that I was using when I would say that gave your mother the impression that, yeah, he's saying sure, but he doesn't really want to do it. So I think that's important. I think we need to be conscious of the message we're sending with our tone and our body language.
Yeah, it's funny you mention that because I've had conversations on what sure actually means. Which
Yeah, so good.
it goes back to just having communication on when you say sure, what do you mean by sure?
Yeah. And that's how your mother and I solved it, right? Like she said to me several times, like, I feel like when you say sure, you don't really want to do it. And then we talked about it, and I said, no, that's not the case. If I say sure, I'm saying yes. And so that's part of the good communication, right? Asking for clarification. And I think I'm sure we're not the only people that feel like that's sure. Cause it's not, I think, well, listen, the more I talk about it, the more I think, maybe that's not being clear and concise, right? Maybe that is a little ambiguous saying sure. And maybe it's sending the wrong message, and I'm not being purposeful with my communication and clear on my intent, right? So maybe I just learned a good lesson there, that although in my mind that might mean yes, maybe I need to be a little bit more not doesn't lack confidence, but maybe a little bit more assertive with my affirmative answer.
Got one thought I want to throw out there.
Go ahead.
So as we're talking, and I'm just thinking, for somebody who may be listening, who is trying to have one of these tough conversations, how do you start? If you're trying to resolve an issue with somebody, and you just don't know where to even begin, what is a good general baseline?
I mean, I think it's just asking for the conversation, right? Hey, do you have some time for a conversation? And then I think it's using like I statements. And again, I'm no expert in good communication for sure, but think, hey, again, be clear on your intent, right? So it could be as simple as, hey, I'm feeling a little bad about our interaction last night. Do you have some time to talk about it? Hey, I'm feeling a little bad about the way you spoke to me on that text message. Do you have some time to talk about it? It's an I statement. You're not accusing them of anything. You're not saying, hey, you hurt my feelings when we talked about that last night, or when you sent me that text message last night. Hey, I feel my feelings were hurt. Hey, I'm not feeling great about that text message. Hey, I'm not feeling great about that conversation we had. So I think, again, it's just a matter of asking to have the conversation and doing some of the other things that we've already talked about. And I think, I statements are important. I think not being accusatory, right? If it's a difficult conversation or you have to confront somebody about something, you don't kind of frame it in an accusatory tone. It's better to seek understanding. And if you're presenting it in that tone where you're trying to understand what happened and you're trying to make sense of what happened in your own mind and work it out in your own head, and you're looking for clarification, I think that's an easy way to get the conversation going is, hey, I feel this way. Can we talk about it?
Yeah, and one thing I want to hit too is that we also have to kind of be okay with and understand that that person may not want to have the conversation right then and there. Maybe they're not ready for it. Maybe they just don't want to have the conversation. And I think going into it, knowing that if that does happen, then you don't get emotional over it because you already factored that in.
Yeah. So everybody has like a different attachment style. And some people, their attachment style is like an avoidant attachment style. Some people is totally drawing a blank on the other side, but it's like they need to have the conversation right away, right? And so if two people with different attachment styles are trying to communicate, one might need separate from the situation and not talk about it, to your point. But the important thing is if like your significant other has a different kind of attachment style, and they're the type that like, I need to talk about this, I need to address it now, I need to get this off my chest, that, hey, I need to take a few minutes with this, I'm going to step away from this. But the important part for the person who has the avoidant attachment style, and I think that's my attachment style, is a bit of an avoidance attachment style. It's important for that person to come back to the other person and address their concerns. And I think if you and your significant other have different attachment styles, it's important for you both to understand it. Because one, you'll understand each other a little better, and you'll understand why you do certain things and why your significant other does certain things, which again will improve your communication if you have a little understanding of, why, again, in my case, avoidant attachment style. Well, why does Jay need to take a few minutes? Why does he want to, clear his head before he can have this conversation? And knowing that I'll come back to it is important. Right. Right. So how about digital communication? In this day and age, everything's digital, right? Listen, I know sometimes I'm like, why make a phone call when I can just shoot a text, right? And certainly not in a critical conversation or something important should you do that, but I think if we're going to talk about communication, we certainly have to talk about digital communication, because we live in a digital world.
I think some of the problems with having a conversation over text is that actually seeing the person and hearing the tone of their voice is important. And so when you do that through text, it's all left up to assumption, right? So people can, if I send out a text and I know I'm coming from a good place, but then that person assumes that I'm coming from a bad place, then that can spiral into a whole bigger thing than it ever needed to be. Where, to your point, it actually would have been easier to just call the person so that at least they could hear the tone of my voice when I'm talking to them, or what message I'm trying to relay to them, instead of leaving a wide range of assumptions to take place.
Yeah, you kind of lose the tone and the intent when you're communicating digitally. And I think, there's going to be certain times where probably maybe that's the only way you can communicate. So I think being clear on what you mean, and maybe over explaining your point or your message would help when you're communicating digitally.
Yeah, I think also a problem is that it's super easy to just fire back a text, right? When somebody says something to you, you click a few buttons and then you could send the text and not really think about it. So it's important to realize, hey, this could turn into an argument, or this has gotten a little heated. Maybe let's take a little, it's one of those times you could take a break and you could say, hey, let's come back to this when we have time to actually talk and not just discuss this over text.
Yeah, for sure. All right, son. Well, listen, I think not sure we were as clear and concise as I would have liked to have been in a podcast about good communication, but let's try and wrap it up with some benefits of good communication.
I think the first immediate positive that you can get from having a conversation, especially the tough, awkward ones, is that you start to build confidence in yourself that you can have these conversations, and that it's okay to have these conversations, and that you're going to get through these conversations.
Yeah, like anything, the more you do it, the easier it becomes, right? And the more natural it becomes. And like you said early on, reps is how you get good at communicating. So I definitely think a benefit of good communication is more communication, right? Better communication, easier communication, and the confidence to have these conversations. I think when I think of benefits from a personal standpoint is when we had this clear and honest communication and an understanding and what is said, what is meant, and what is heard are all in line, I think it builds trust, right? And I think when we have a good understanding of each other through good communication, it builds trust.
Oftentimes when we go into conversations, we're a little bit fearful of what's going to come from the conversation. And then once we have the conversation, we kind of realize that fear was maybe a little unnecessary. And to your point of the um confidence, I think it builds confidence in both sides as well, that the two sides are mature enough to have conversations like this.
Yeah, I think you hit on something that we do, not just when it comes to conversations and communication, but we tend to, as humans, tend to catastrophize things, right? We always expect we always do like a worst case scenario in our head and kind of make things out to be worse than they are. And then when they happen, they're never as bad as we make them out to be, right? And I think that happens with communication too. But I think the more we communicate, the better we communicate, the more we reduce that. There's less misunderstandings and it becomes easier to resolve disagreements when we stop catastrophizing things, right? Because it causes some defensiveness or maybe some aggressiveness that is unnecessary in the communication.
Yeah, I think in that way, it's a huge weight lifted off your shoulder of like, all right, we got through it and we had this conversation. And it's also a weight lifted off your shoulder in a way that maybe, sometimes there's a lot of animosity built up before we have this conversation. And you're in this awkward kind of, I can't think of the word right now, but an awkward stage in whatever relationship you have with this person. And now it's like, all right, now we address the situation. We know what the problem is. We know what the solution is, and now we can take action on it.
Yeah, it goes back to building trust, right? And I think from a leadership standpoint, it just strengthens our leadership abilities and the confidence people have in us as leaders when we learn to communicate effectively and inspire and guide those who we're leading.
Yeah, I think, and you're just hitting on leadership. A lot of when you're in a leadership role, you may be fearful of having these conversations. And then once you finally do have the conversations, now it opens up the opportunity to continue to have these conversations.
Yeah. I think from a leadership standpoint, it's important, and we kind of hit on this, I think, throughout the podcast, is to not put these conversations off, right? The more we kick the can down the road, the harder they become. And the reality is, and I'm guilty of this, is kicking the can down the road isn't really for the other person. It's for us, right? We don't want to have the uncomfortableness of having the conversation. But to your point, and the more you have these conversations, the easier they become, the more confident you become in having them, and being able to communicate it without the unnecessary or undue stress of having the conversation. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's important for leaders to communicate effectively.
Yeah, I think a lot of times we think, it'll go away with time, or it'll get better with time, and maybe for a short period of time, it does seem like it's getting better. It does seem like it went away, but it's going to go into this evolution of things are just going to keep snowballing, and now that one relatively simple conversation turned into a whole big ordeal because we kept pushing it off.
Yeah, and more than likely, the problem's just going to get bigger by not addressing it.
Yeah. Got any other positives?
No, I think we hit on everything that I can think of, and I think the bottom line is obviously good communication is important. It's a two-way street. It's not just talking; it's listening. It's probably more listening than it is talking. It's that old saying: God gave you two ears and one mouth for a reason. So you should be listening more than you're talking in good communication. And I think, again, reiterate the four agreements. Don't make assumptions, be meticulous with your word, and don't take things personal, and always do your best, right? The first three certainly apply to good communication, but always do your best applies to everything in your life. I think if you kind of, Don Miguel Ruiz, I think is the name. I couldn't remember the last name in the beginning of the podcast, but I think if you kind of use those four agreements as guidelines for your communication, I think, I think you'll be okay. And ask good questions. That's an important one.
Yeah, I think the point we're trying to make here is that nothing negative is going to come out of the conversation. There's only positives that can come from it.
If it's effective.
Yeah, of course. Right. If it's a big ego, a lot of, I know we didn't get into it much, but ego and pride plays a big part in having these conversations.
Yeah, I think when you're having these hard conversations, you need to check your ego and your pride a little bit, right? And you need to be open-minded. We did kind of hit on that. We talked about open-mindedness. We didn't use the words ego and pride, but that's part of being open-minded, right? You got to kind of check your ego and your pride and be willing to truly listen and take in what the other person's saying.
I think how we could set that up is having an open dialect and letting the other person know, hey, this is an open conversation. Like, we're just going back and forth. This is not, if you're a leader, this is not the boss coming to the employee or whatever it may be. This is just two adults having a conversation.
Yeah, you have to allow people to speak freely, right? Oh, hopefully we shared some insight for good communication, and like I said at the beginning of the podcast, I'm certainly no expert, and it's something I'm always working on, and I'm going to take what we talked about tonight and apply it in my life.
Yeah, like you said, it's something we got to constantly work on, and it's good being able to get on here and have some communication with you.
Always good to communicate with you, son. Love you.